Discussing Dyslexia with Katelyn and Dawn Coker. Hi, I'm Katelyn Coker.
And I'm Dawn Coker.
And welcome back to Discussing Dyslexia. In today's video, we're going to be talking about elementary school. And we're really fortunate that we actually get to talk about my journey because we were diagnosed in elementary school. A lot of dyslexics don't have this story because they're diagnosed later in life. And that's really cool, something we actually get to share with you. One thing that I honestly had no idea about was that there's differences between like federal and state laws regarding services and disabilities. So a lot is different between private and public elementary school. And the reason I bring that up is I attended a private elementary school. So I would love if Mom, if you want to share kind of the differences and a little bit more about that.
Well, I think it's important to understand that, significant differences exist between special education and related services that are offered to students enrolled in a public school district and those whose parents choose to enroll them in a private or homeschool. The federal laws don't require school districts to provide private or homeschool students with the same level or scope of services as public school students. Now, they are required to provide you with evaluation at the same level as other students in the district by law. But they're not required to provide the same services to a child that's enrolled in a private school. In our school district and basically across the country, school districts are only required to devote a proportionate share of their federal special education funds to the provision of services to the group of eligible private school students. So individual school districts can determine within their own budget how much of their special education budget will be used to provide services for students that are not in the public school, but who choose to attend, whose parents choose to send them to public school or private school, which is what our case was. And we had to be aware of that going into it. And therefore, we always kind of were making sure that we were considering our options for public school education should the private school setting not be able to accommodate your needs. So, I think that's important to know, and people need to make sure you understand what your rights are, whether you're in a public school or private school, and understand the differences.
Especially parents. That's a big one for parents. Again, I had no idea that's, of course, this is Illinois state.
Right, but it is federal.
Right.
You do have the Illinois, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act does require that you have a right to be tested and evaluated and identified. Right. That's equally compared to somebody in a public school. It just means that the services don't have to be equal to what they provide to somebody enrolled in a public school. And that's a federal situation. So, but again, each school district determines how much of that money and therefore how much services you're able to get.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're just gonna dive right into our experiences.
When did you, Katelyn, understand that you were dyslexic? Because you were diagnosed at the end of first grade, but did you really understand or comprehend what that meant?
I always understood that there was something different. I never really understood the whole components of it. So ever since I was tested, I always knew the word dyslexia and I always knew I could use it, but I don't really think I comprehended fully what that meant. And it wasn't until I would say 4th, 5th grade when you're really starting to become independent and you're really starting to do your own schoolwork that I started taking an interest in self-educating myself. I think a big thing that really helped me was, I know that this is a little, you know, after elementary school, but in middle school, I did a lot of research projects. You know, we would do science fairs, and that's really when I started to take on and understand everything. And
Mhm.
I started to do my own research, and I think that's very important. But fourth and fifth grade is when I started asking questions and fully comprehending that what dyslexia was. But I would say ever since I was diagnosed, you and Dad did a really good job of saying, hey, when people ask, or when you need to be your own self-advocate, you're dyslexic. And I am sure I mispronounced it. I have dyslexia, but I
Got it.
knew something was not necessarily wrong with me, but would prohibit me from learning in a traditional environment. So take us back to, we just got diagnosed at the end of first grade.
Mhm.
How did you communicate my disability to the schools and to the teachers and all of that?
Well, there actually was a formal process that had to happen every year. Once we got you diagnosed through the public school system, then they created, or we worked with them and with your teachers to create what was called an individual service plan. Not in the other common words that you hear are individualized education plan and 504 plans.
Right.
Those are more public school terms. Because you were in a private school, we had an individualized service plan because the district was providing you services. So we would meet every year that would have a list of accommodations or any um, other resources in the school or outside the school that you were going to be taking part in for that year. And then we would receive notification at the beginning of every school year that we needed to have a conference and reevaluate that. The more we did that, the less we used the public school system and just kind of worked with the private school teachers as they got to know us and got to know you. We created our own individualized service plans. But the biggest thing I think I did every year was sit down individually with your teacher for that year and have a discussion at the very beginning of the year, and educate them as to what dyslexia is and help them learn how to work with you. And they were very receptive to that because, quite honestly, not a lot of the teachers admitted to having knowledge of how to work with a dyslexic or even know what it is. So I caught myself educating the teachers about it. But we always had a list of accommodations, basically, that followed you from year to year. And those were the basis of the conversation every year. And we would, that list grew as
What were
we
some of
became,
those accommodations?
early on, like when we in the district plans, you would have like small group. You could ask for small group settings for tests. You could ask for items to be read aloud to you. Directions repeated or clarified. Extended time for homework or tests. Visual cues for reversals. You had pictures of a B and a D, and actually I think it was a bed, so you could know what when you were writing what a B and a D is, and P and Q, we had those on there. So we had those on your desk, so there were visual cues to help you with the reversal situation. You
I
also
will
had
say I had this on my desk every year in elementary school, but it was like the word bed, and
Mhm.
it would be so it looked like one, and I would always sit there and go b bed d, and so I would know. But it was always the funniest thing because people would always walk by my desk and be like, I'd in spelling tests and stuff, people would be looking like, yeah, I just do
Yeah.
it a lot more than you.
I think the other thing too is preferential seating. We learned that with the auditory processing issues that it was important that you have an area where there wasn't a lot of background noise. You wouldn't sit near a window where there was recess happening outside. I mean, things like that. Most of the time you were near the front of the room so that you had access to the teacher. And then the other one initially was pre-teaching. So we would get homework in advance. We'd get spelling words in advance.
Reading,
And
big one was when we would all have to read from the textbook in class, and I could not be
mhm.
called on. But
Yeah,
if
that
we
one was
did,
later
teachers
on.
would try to make it more
That was
fair,
late.
and they'd
Yeah,
say,
that
"Hey,
was
you're
kind
going to
of
read the
later on.
third paragraph on page 60
Yeah,
in
so
class."
we could practice that before you actually had to read it. Yeah, so we would. It took a lot of, work at home too. We did a lot of stuff at home. So, and you had a tutor, so that helped with alleviate some of the work with us. But
Yeah, I know
that
there's
was
going to
part of
be.
your
Oh,
that was part of your individualized service plan,
right.
pretty much through elementary school. But again, those things, those accommodations grew as you grew. I think we were kind of joking about it. I think your first IEP or ISP had, like 6 accommodations. And by the time you got to 5th grade, it was like, 18.
Right. I think
Because
too, one thing that's really important to know is that when you're setting up accommodations, there are tips and tricks to doing so. One of them that we learned was never take anything off. Even if you don't think you need it anymore, never take it off, because the minute you do it, it's gone and you're going to have to fight to get it back. So it's just better to keep things on.
hmm
We also learned that using vague language is to your advantage. So everything in your accommodations needs to either say at student's discretion or when asked by student. So like
or as needed.
or
Hmm
as needed. But if you put as needed, you need to put by the student,
hmm
because who's to say it's needed, the teacher or the
hmm
dyslexic?
Yeah, at
Always the
students' request. Yeah, that was more,
has
I
to be.
think that's more we figured out later on, because early on it was more at my request, when you didn't really know. Because I think the funny thing about you early on is that you didn't want to have to use your accommodations. Like, you were very stubborn and didn't want to have to use them. And you would be, once you got more involved in the process of figuring out your accommodations, even later on in later in elementary school, 4th, 5th grade, you're like, I don't need that anymore. I don't need that anymore. It's like, well, we need to keep it in there in case someday you do need it, because once it's out of there, the teachers don't have to do that. And you have no recourse for them to follow your accommodations if it's not in there.
Right.
So even like using colored overlays, that had to be in there. That's a resource tool later on, and being able to use, you had a pen and you were able to bring a computer. Those were all things that later on we added, and just continue to keep them in there. And we're glad we did, because when we switched over to the public school, there was already those accommodations in place. So that's an important thing to kind of understand.
Yeah. I think again, I don't remember a lot because this was years ago and very beginning of your schooling, but I do remember not ever wanting to use them, mostly because they made me feel different. And when people said I couldn't do things, that was my nature in saying, screw you, I can. So
Mhm.
um, that was really all the only stuff I remember. And for me, it was learning that it was okay to use them. Like, that was something that I had to do myself, was sit there and go say, okay, Katelyn, you're not doing hot on spelling, you're not doing hot on XYZ. Use them. They're there to help you, use them. And it took me later in my schooling to really figure that out. And is something I wish I would have figured out earlier. Not
Well, I think,
necessarily abuse them or overuse them, but at
right.
least instead of staying up to 1 o'clock in the morning learning spelling words, probably would have been easier just to take a shorter spelling test or things like that. But
Right. I think some of the more important accommodations, like later on in elementary school, I think some of that was, we called it chunking. So like tests, being broken down into smaller segments and completed over several periods of time, especially like standardized tests that they would take all the time. Being able to complete standardized tests in a booklet versus trying to write and fill in grids. That was very important because it was hard for you to line up questions with the grid answer sheet. The other thing too is we had, now I know this is probably not as much of accommodation that's needed now because a lot of textbooks are online, and a lot of teachers use online formats, but we had an extra set of textbooks at home. And that was so tutor had a set, I had a set. Being able to type stories versus writing stories later on when you got to that point
yeah.
of your elementary education. I mean, you were able to take a computer. That was before everybody had computers. It's a little different now, but
Well, to
that was
that
not the
point,
case.
one thing I've noticed now is it's the opposite. That accommodation completely flipped-flopped in college. All of our books were online. All of them were Audible. That wasn't the issue. I personally, and this again, do not take this to heart, different for everyone. I personally do not comprehend text after reading it on a screen. I have to have a physical copy in front of me. So my university went fully online. They were trying to minimize paper, so they made it nearly impossible for a while to get a hardback textbook. Me with my accommodations, they had to go out of their way to get me a physical textbook. And I still had access to the online ones that my tuition paid for it. So I would put it on, have it read it to me, but I was physically reading along with it in
Well,
my
how,
textbook.
yeah, but that was an accommodation you developed early on.
Well,
You
yes, but
always,
it's funny how it's flipped. It
yeah, it
was,
is.
we needed the
Yeah,
Audible
right.
for
Yeah,
us to be able just to speed up reading.
right. And
And then
that's
it
just how,
turned into, it says that I get extra copies and an Audible. So
yeah,
I need a physical
yeah,
copy.
that's how you basically, that's how you kind of learn to read. And when that was taken away, yeah, it was hard. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that may have changed now that everyone has a laptop. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah.
Who knows? But
What do you remember about the accommodations? What do you remember, I mean, I know because a lot of the stuff happened, we were talking about it. You said you didn't remember before we got out, we started recording, you said you didn't remember all the annual meetings because a lot of times it was just Dad and I that went. So, and we would just kind of speak for you and get these accommodations in place.
I remember the one-on-ones with the teachers. I remember us sitting there, all of us having conversations about what I could use, what I couldn't use. And I remember it was a catch-22 whether like the teacher would either just give them to me or whether they were trying to make me independent and ask. But if I did not want to use them, that was just something that I don't recommend to anyone. Use them if you need them, but for some reason I wanted to make my life more difficult and wanted to do it. And while I have a great work ethic now and it's helped me in the long run, I could have retained the same information an easier way. So
Did you prefer the teacher that just accepted your accommodations and kind of just taught you that way all the time, or did you prefer the teacher that would ask you or kind of allowed you to ask for those accommodations?
I always preferred the teacher that asked. Mostly that was a big thing is I didn't want to be singled out. That was a fear of mine all through elementary school. Thank goodness I got over it after elementary school, but I hated being singled out. So if a teacher just automatically assumed and gave me shorter tests, more instruction, a lot of the times I felt like they thought I couldn't do it. And that feeling sucked, thinking that your teacher doesn't
Mm,
think that you can do it. Now, of
got
course,
it.
that was all me, but that was
Right,
my thought
right.
process back then. And on the flip side, I hated the teacher that would just do it for me. I had them just do stuff for you. I never learned anything. I
Yeah, I
remember
remember.
I always was very outspoken in elementary school. I remember telling them, I can do it. I'm not dumb.
Yeah,
I wish you could have seen that
I
teacher's
remember having
face, but
conversations. Yeah, I remember going. That was one thing too. From a parent's perspective, I maintained communication with the teachers throughout the year. Like we conversed a lot, and when you would come home and make mention of something, or maybe you felt dumb about this or that, or the teacher wouldn't let me do this, we would have a conversation about it, so I understood exactly what the situation was. And then um, I would have a conversation with the teachers and say, you need to let her try, or the opposite. She needs to you need to read the directions better to her, or more to her, even though she doesn't ask. So there was a lot of talk, I think, between you and I and the teachers, back and forth between me and the teachers, me and you, just to try to make sure um, you were getting the accommodations you needed, and you were asking for the accommodations you needed.
right.
So that was
Which
kind
was
of the
good,
balancing act I
honestly, and
had to
it
do.
helped me become more independent.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess
Yeah.
did you feel that the teachers knew about dyslexia, or at least were receptive to my accommodations and to teaching me a different way?
I don't think the teachers knew a lot about dyslexia at all. I mean, I would ask point blank, have you ever taught a dyslexic? No. And I would have to tell them, yes, you have, because 1 in 5 children in your classroom are dyslexic, which was always kind of like a whoa. And then but we got very, very lucky. I mean, honestly, all of your teachers at St. Vincent's were wonderful and very open to learning about dyslexia and working with you, working with me. And I think in the process we were able to educate them and probably help kids later on, who would have those same teachers. So and I know from inside stories that a lot of dyslexics that came after you, they would purposely give to some of the teachers that you had, because they knew they had learned something from working with you. So, that was encouraging. So,
Yeah, I think I remember that. I remember the teachers always being very receptive,
mm-hmm,
especially in the elementary school. We were just, by the grace of God, just given wonderful teachers.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I A lot of people don't remember a lot of their teachers' names, and I frankly remember all but maybe one. And it's funny because maybe it's just, Catholic school, Catholic church. I've seen them since, and maybe it's because they just never forget their first dyslexic, or I had older and younger siblings. I don't know, but I love meeting with all of them. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
really cool thing that they did is, especially my first grade teacher, and second and third did as well, but they found something I loved and got invested with that with me. It's like, I love to sing. So I remember my first grade teacher singing with me to help me do things. I remember my second and third grade teacher singing in church, and me being like, that's so cool, my teacher singing in church. And then they would ask if I would want to, and then it'd be something fun to look forward to at the end of the week. We're singing in church.
Well, and we would even, there's a lot of times when we were learning spelling words, we would sing the letters, and we would, you know, figure out ways to help you learn that way too. And that was,
Right. And they
always
didn't they
fun
didn't have
too.
to do that. That's something they did out of
Mm-hmm.
like the goodness of their heart. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think you had brought up some stuff that my second grade teacher had done that was just above and beyond. And I'm sure we're going to touch on that later, but in this video, but just
Mhm.
above and beyond by every single person at that school, and just forever thankful. So I guess to move things along, what other kinds of additional programs was I involved with? I remember a
Mm.
few. I remember like handwriting, but I obviously you would know better the names and.
Well, when you were first diagnosed and we were going through the process, they recommended OT, occupational therapy, specifically for handwriting difficulty because you were also diagnosed with dysgraphia, which is basically dyslexia for handwriting, processing, how to get your hands work, that type of thing. Um, and the goal was to upgrade your visual motor skill for handwriting. I thought it was always funny because they always had a short-term objective, which was to write 3 paragraphs using a dynamic tripod grasp, holding the pencil correctly. Yeah.
I remember them making me hold the pencil, and they would hold their hand over mine, and I would get so weirded out. I was like, "Don't hold my hand. Don't do it."
I think one of the other things too was one of the goals was to get you to stay on the lines. And I have to honestly say, do you think they ever reach that goal? Do you think
No,
ever
I
were
still.
able to do that?
Well, I'm wanting to. I wish I had something in my handwriting. I'm a songwriter. Maybe I do have something. What's this one? You see, half of it is through the line.
So anyway, you'd have to go to OT 30 minutes. I think it was 2 or 3 times a week, pulled out of class, go work on your handwriting.
Funny enough, I remember when we were learning cursive. Every time they're like, "Please pull out your cursive booklets, Katelyn," and I'd be like, "Yep, I know the room. I'm heading. See you all later." I
Yeah, that was, I mean, the required OT only lasted a year, but that was an additional thing that you had to do. You did some summer school remediation on reading through the public schools over the summer at the public school you would have gone to. So you would go to like a summer school for that, just basically focus on reading. And the other thing at the school they had was kind of a computerized reading program called Academy of Reading.
and I loved it
And
so much.
yeah, I mean, we found out later that, I mean, it helped for a while when in the early stages when you were still learning to read a little bit. I mean, basically you had to read a book or read paragraphs or read things online on the computer and then
You know
answer
what it was?
questions.
You know the standardized testing where it's like a little picture and then a paragraph? That's exactly what it was. It was like a reading test from the standardized. Same
Mhm.
stories, same questions. I felt
It
like
was,
I was taking the
yeah.
ISAT.
Yeah, it was timed. And, for a while we kept seeing slight improvements, but then it got to a point in elementary school where we weren't seeing any improvements. And after some more research and consultation, especially with, some of the outside resources we were using to help you, they're like, it's not gonna help because it's all about timing. And you had to read this story in a certain amount of time, take a test and comprehend it.
So
And
I just want to put this out there. I had an accommodation for extended time, right? To help me learn in school. So why would a program that is timed
right,
be beneficial? I'm just gonna put that one
right.
out there.
Well, live
I
and
also am
learn.
just I'm very sour about this one program because they took my summers. I had to go during the summer.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like, come on. The one
yeah,
place that
yeah.
already gives me anxiety and you want me to come back and I could be at the pool.
Yeah, we later learned that probably, live and learn from us. That's not the kind of reading program that's gonna
No.
gonna help the dyslexic. So, but it was something that we did. So,
And then was I in any like special education classes or anything like that?
You had a resource teacher that would work with you to help in school, so you didn't have as much homework after school. So you, during like later on, as you got to study halls and things like that, you would be able to take time to go meet with the resource teacher, usually her and maybe one or two other students, and you basically were able to use that was the extra time to work on assignments maybe you didn't get done during the class period, or maybe get a head start on some homework, or maybe relearn something that you were struggling with. So that was really the only special education, because quite honestly, the school didn't have in and of itself special education rooms or special education programs.
Right. I think
They weren't designed to that.
all I remember, and now of course this was this one school. We had one resource room, or special ed room, and it was a classroom, so fairly large with just some round tables in it. But any occupational therapy, cursive, anything, those were in supply closets. Teacher, like I remember one time it was in a janitor's closet with a desk. Another time it was in the teacher's lounge while teachers were in there trying to have lunch and stuff. Just, yeah, like just anywhere you could find.
Yeah,
There
because
was
the
addition,
OT,
so to the
yeah, the OT,
school.
well, that's because the OT that was through the public school, they actually sent somebody from the public school system, and they would come and do that service with you at the
Right.
school. Um, so, and again, the school wasn't set up with a special education room. That was one thing we had to accept being at a private school. That would be a different situation had you been in a public school, because later on we went to public school and you experienced the other side of that.
Oh yeah, there were rooms everywhere. But I remember one time I got to be in the principal's office because the principal was out sick that day. I was like, score! I shouldn't be in here. But
So Katelyn, what do you remember like about how kids reacted maybe to you being different? They didn't really know. Did they know what was going on, or?
no, they had the same amount of clue as I did. They just knew that I wasn't in the classroom. It's funny. Like I personally did not like being singled out, but a lot of the times I don't even think the kids noticed, especially early on. Early on, I got a lot of questions about it, but I think it was genuinely concern, and not even concern, just wonder. Like, hey, where do you go? And it was a lot of, hey, God made me different. Like that was something engraved in my head. God made me a little different. It takes me longer and I need more help to read. And a lot of the times they'd be like, cool, As you get older and as you start to realize people are different, I won't sugarcoat it. Like there were times I was bullied for it. That's going to happen everywhere. People get bullied for everything. And for me, like I could notice a big line between people wondering and people poking fun, And if people genuinely were wondering, I had no issue explaining to them exactly where I go. And what helped is later, fourth, fifth grade, there was another girl in my class, not sure if she was dyslexic or what, but she was receiving the same similar resource treatment and would have to go with me. So it was a lot easier to be like, me and Molly just go to this place, you know? Then I think when people would make fun of me, it was hard. A lot of the times I didn't know what to say, and a lot of the times teachers would try to step in and protect you, and there's no good way around it rather than just trying to educate them. And a lot of it I didn't realize was that bad until I had left to go to a public school. Like looking back on it, it's like, oh, that really was bullying. But of course, me, I'm like, I want to be friends with everyone. But best thing is to sit there and just try to educate, and one day they'll understand. Like 1 in 5 people have dyslexia. The kid making fun of you could be
Might
diagnosed
be
later in
dyslexic
life.
too.
And that's happened.
Right,
That's
right,
happened. I've had a kid
right.
make fun of me in the past and called me in high school and was like, hey. I was like, joke's on you now. So I guess there's no easy way, but
Yeah. So what
maybe
advice,
maybe joining a support group like this.
there you go. So do you
So
have any advice for that student that maybe is struggling with academics and I mean, there's especially like a dyslexic, they're very intelligent. So I mean, it's not, you're not dumb by any way, any stretch of the word, but it's perceived that way sometimes just because you're struggling to read. I mean, what would you say to that first or second grade Katelyn, that is dealing with that?
you're not dumb. That's just, you're not stupid.
Mhm.
Things, I think a big thing that I had to realize is that everyone's going to have something they struggle with. Everyone's going to have a weaker subject. And if anything, this is a luxury because you can learn how to read differently. If you suck at math, you're going to suck at math the rest of your life. But you can learn a different way. At least with dyslexia, you can learn a different way to read. So you're not dumb. That's one of the
Mhm.
big things. I would also say learn to have fun and joke about it. I think that's something that really turns people off, as I sit there and joke about it all the time. And I've had to draw that line of who can joke about it and who can't. That's a big thing. And for someone in elementary school, they're going to be figuring that out for years on who can joke about it and who can't. I had no idea. But later in life, and I'm sure we'll touch on this story like when we get into middle school and high school, my close-knit circle, my circle I tell everyone to, can joke about my disability. We can text about it. We can have fun trying to figure out what I tried to send to you the other day over text, and the sky's the limit on how you want to joke about it. If you don't know my middle name and you don't know what's going on in my life, nope. And currently I have no problem telling you no.
Well, I think the other thing that I think we told you a long time early on, and I would share this with any younger child that's dyslexic, is, yes, it's termed a disability, but it's a challenge. And you can still be successful. You just have to rise to the challenge. You just got to meet the challenge head on and work through it. And just understand it's going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge, but you can be successful and you can accomplish what everybody else can accomplish. You're just going to have to do it a different way.
Right,
I
right.
think that's kind of, the big thing that we kind of kept pushing in trying to instill in you. So,
Some of the best advice I was given in elementary school was, I think we touched on this in the diagnostic video, but have that superhero. Have that person that you can look up to that's already been through it. Bella Thorne,
mhm,
Albert Einstein. Find one
mhm,
and then be like, guess what? So when things get tough or people are joking, you can be like, guess what? Guess who also is dyslexic? You think they're
mhm,
cool.
mhm.
I'm cool. So what advice? Well, let me ask you this first, because I think this is very cool. Obviously 1 in 5 people have dyslexia.
Mhm.
Were there kids or parents that came to you later in life that found out their child were dyslexic? And how did you approach them?
I've had a lot of parents, elementary, middle, high school parents ask me, how did I know what was the signs and symptoms? What's the next step? How do I find out? So I've been a resource for parents to get their children tested and diagnosed. And many have thanked me later on, because it's, the earlier you can get your child diagnosed, start getting the remediation, start figuring out what works for that dyslexic child, the easier the education system is going to be. And again, we talked about it does affect other aspects of your life, but it really impacts academics. And as soon as you can start having a reason why this is happening, then you can start working on it. And that's, I think, that's important. So
I have also have had many peers, colleagues, friends contact me, and I think what surprises people is I always give them my personal information. And I'm always like, I can't help you with the fundamental side, but I like coffee.
you
You
can go
can
have
tell me about your
coffee and talk
day.
about it.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
What advice do you have to parents that are going through this in elementary school?
I think my advice is be an advocate for your child, be their voice, but at the same time, teach them how to be their own voice. Educate them as to what is really happening and why they are the way they are. Let them know that it's going to be a challenge, and they need to own the fact that this is going to be something they will live with the rest of their life, and then work with them to accept it and advocate for themselves and advocate for them. Because that, I think, in the end is what is going to be the most important thing. I mean, obviously, get the remediation, get this resources, use the tools, which we'll talk about all of those. But I think in the end, we've had situations come up in college that, you know, we had to, pull the dis- disability act out and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, you gotta know what's available to you. And the more parents can educate themselves and educate their children to be their own advocates, I think that's the most important thing. But in elementary school, it's super important that you be the advocate, that you don't get frustrated, that you just understand that it's going to be hard, and be the support system for your child.
I think that's so true. I know it's hard. I know the extra homework is hard. There were nights where we were doing homework up until midnight, 1 a.m. I'd go to sleep for a few hours and then we'd do it again. A lot
Mhm,
of that was because I wouldn't take shorter assignments and I would
mhm,
get it in on time. We'd wake up the next morning, 6, 5 a.m., finish it, and I'd go to school.
mhm,
One thing that you never did that I really appreciated, because I've seen other parents do it, is you never got frustrated with me. You would get frustrated at teachers, you'd get frustrated at the assignments. How many times are we going to write the same essay on peanut butter and jelly? But you never got frustrated with me. A dyslexic already feels dumb and already feels like a burden. There were so many times I felt like a burden. So I could only imagine if the person trying to help me was getting frustrated at me. And there are going to be nights where things don't click.
mhm.
And just thank you, you never made me feel that way. And I know that that's been a real struggle for other people that I've come to know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I know people are going to ask, but and after my 5th grade year, I switched to a public school. I went to Dunlap Valley Elementary. And I think
No,
we get
middle
this question
school.
a lot. Why did we switch? No, Dunlap Middle, Dunlap Valley Middle School. Thank you. Why did we switch to a public school?
Well, as we said early on in the video, and in this discussion, we had to monitor the resources and the availability of the resources, and making sure you were getting the help in school. We were doing what we could outside of school with tutors and learning centers and and helping you with homework, but we had to make sure that while you were in school, you were also getting the resources you needed. And to be honest, there was one resource teacher to very many children who needed help. And
She was a wonderful woman.
she was great. And you were starting to make a lot of good progress. You still needed help, but you were compared to the other students who needed help, you were more independent. And she basically came to me and said, I have to stop helping Katelyn because I have so many more kids underneath her that need more help than she does. And as much as we didn't want to have to leave the Catholic school system because we wanted that type of education for you, we felt it was more important that you had access to resources that you would need not only now but in the future. And so we have a wonderful school district here in our area, public school district. And so we actually moved houses so we could be in that school district. And
Not that year, though.
not that year, but we did it knowing it was coming. No, we moved earlier prior to that, but we did move knowing that our time within the Catholic school system was probably limited because of the resource situation. So that was a conscious move we made. So, being in the district, we decided going into middle school, which is critical because you're now starting a lot more reading for learning. We wanted to make sure you had access to whatever you needed from a resource perspective. So that was our reason for switching schools.
All right. Well, just to give everyone a heads up, we really enjoyed this talk on elementary school. Our next video is going to be same time frame. We're going to talk about everything we did outside of school, from private tutors to a learning center that was centered around dyslexia and like disabilities. That's going to be a great discussion because I know a lot of people ask, what did we do outside of school? What can we do? We're talking about homework, things like that.
I think we're also going to add into that, finding that thing outside of school.
Yes.
That gives you a break and makes you feel special. So
we're going to start talking about that.
Yeah.
Then this Thursday, we have our first spotlight. So it's a new thing we're going to start. Might not be every week, might be some random, but hopefully every Thursday, we're going to have another dyslexic in our community or family member, professional that's just doing something amazing right now. Our spotlight this week is not released yet. It'll be released today. So Thursday will be released. This person is just doing amazing. It's the perfect person to kick off this series, and we're so excited for you to sit down with us on Thursday. If you are interested in being our next spotlight, there is an application out. That application is under our link tree. I'll put it below. And then on Sunday, we have another live Q&A. This is one that we are very excited about. We're going to talk about all the tips and tricks, tools, and technology that we used, from something as simple as a piece of paper to laptop settings. And we realize it's been a long time since I've used a lot of this. Some of it, I'm thinking like Dragon and stuff like that we're going to talk about, we have not used in years, and I don't even think they sell it anymore. So
it's probably more obsolete with the technology that's out now. So
yeah. We would love if you guys would jump on with us. We will have the ability to add you on to our live, or you can just put pictures of it in the feed. And we just want to have that discussion, get as much information out there on this live about little things that you can use. So I'm hoping some of the stuff I used in college and maybe even high school is still relevant, but I'm definitely looking to all the parents and fellow dyslexics in our community right now to help us out with that one. So that's going to be Sunday at 7 Central Time Our spotlight is going to be Thursday at 7 Central Time. And I think that's it for now. So make sure if you want to get in contact with us, like, share. Sharing's the best way to get this out there and to grow our community. And as always, have a great week, and we are excited to see you on Thursday.
See ya.
Bye.